I just take it.
Did I?
It says Verena.
It doesn't.
Yeah. All right, y'all. Go ahead and get started.
I think he's the mic.
Okay. You want to talk? You wanna get them started?
All right, y'all, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Thank y'all for coming to our fourth session, second to last one.
And then I have some logistical stuff. Yeah, so we are recording. This is the fourth training session. Like most of y'all know, we'll have our last training session next Thursday. And that'll be like our graduation. So we'll have some fun stuff planned for y'all. And you guys are almost done with the training. Before we move forward, I just wanted to talk about a few like logistical things really quickly. In the email that I sent out last week, I know this is like sort of confusing, like what to do with the expectations document. So pretty much like what I'm going to do is I'm going to send an updated link in the email like tonight or tomorrow. You're going to get access to this folder right here, right? You're going to get access to, I'm sure most of you like, it said like request access to this. You're going to get access to this folder. What you're going to do is in that email, you see this expectations and policies document. You're going to open this, like sign it at the bottom, and you're going to upload it into this folder right here. And you have three little dots that are right here. You're going to click this and just click like copy link. And that's the link that you're going to copy and put it into the spreadsheet here, like under expectations document link. Like that's sort of like what that means. And again, I'm going to send out the link that's updated with access. I'm going to have it to everyone at Chapel Hill can access it. So as long as you use your UNC email, you should be able to do that. And also this is like the spreadsheet that we have for volunteer information. So if your name like isn't on here somewhere or like your email is wrong, like feel free to put in your phone number if you're comfortable and like what year you're graduating and things like that, just so we have like all of our volunteer information in one place. Are there any questions for that? And then second is keep sending us the HIPAA documents. So like that's another thing that you need to do. That training was also outlined in that email. I can also outline it in this email tomorrow. Just send us that. It shouldn't take like more than 30 minutes. Like, I mean, it won't even take 30 minutes, but send us that. Yeah.
Oh, continue.
Yeah, and then some of y'all started sending us like the CAC like certificate. That's like great. Like, thank you. Just when you get anything like that, just send us a PDF version of it so we have it for our records.
I was gonna say for this contact information page, your phone number is gonna become something that's important whenever you do actually get into clinic.
That's right.
It's gonna be the easiest way for them to contact you if we need to quickly to ask you about a patient that you've seen before, something like that. So if your info isn't already on there, please do try and fill that out.
Yeah. And everybody was able to access a spreadsheet, right? It was just the folder that some of you may have had trouble accessing before. Okay. So just go ahead and do that. And then again, this folder is where you're going to upload that expectations document. Okay. Yeah, so we talked about that. Are there any questions before we move on? I know we've been through like 4 training sessions. It's been like, it's been a lot.
Who still doesn't have CMS.gov access? Okay. That's not
So
terrible.
numbers on. So like, where are we in the process? Like, are we like, how are we in like the 7 to 10 days or like that notification stuff? Okay.
And then for those of you who have been able to get into CMS, what's your module progress looking like? Are you guys feeling good about keeping up with where we're at?
Like who's module 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Okay. Some people just
Yeah,
aren't anywhere, but
that's a good place to be at. And
Yeah.
I think, like we said before, hopefully coming to these will allow you to go through it a little bit quicker. But yeah, it's just something that we have to do. But thank you guys for your hard work and sticking through it.
Yeah.
any questions from like last training session or any questions that y'all have from the modules that you have gone through thus far?
Okay, Marina, you good?
Yeah.
I'm gonna make it a full screen.
Yeah, I'm gonna make it
Full screen. I don't know why it isn't full screen.
Maybe open it.
There we go. Mm. Okay, yep. So today's training session 4, our last training session is going to be at number 5, which is going to be non-module related content, and basically us talking about things that are going to be very important for you to know to be in clinic, but aren't covered in the modules. So more like Shack specific stuff. That's going to be number 5. Just as a reminder, all training sessions are mandatory. So if you're not able to make it to one, please let us know as soon as possible so that we can give you your next steps and things like that. So just reiterating that point as we're finishing up here. And yeah, so we went through this. Today we're just going to review modules 6, 7, and 8. The plan was originally just 7 and 8, but 6 is pretty brief and it has a lot to do with the content that we're covering today. So we kind of tacked it on to the beginning here. So we'll be covering all 3 modules today. And we're going to do a little bit of group discussion and activities as we normally do. And yeah, sorry, I realized I wasn't speaking into the mic, but this is kind of a small room, so I feel like you guys can hear me. And a quick reminder of the volunteer requirements. Yash already touched on all of these, but the expectations document, HIPAA certificate, Practice Fusion is something that we're going to set up once you're actually in clinic. The main point here is to make sure you watch the tutorials about how to use Practice Fusion when those are sent out after training. And lastly is the safe zone training. We talked about this a little bit last week. This isn't happening right now. Did you have any comment more, any updates? Nothing. Yeah, just they're working on it. They're not happening right now, but they could be potentially useful trainings in the future. So just keep an eye out for more info from us on whether those are going to be happening in the future. Cool. Okay. We talked about this. All right, so going straight into module 6, all the modules basically that we're going to be covering today are kind of less insurance related content and more like dealing with patients, very key concepts to understand before going into clinic. And the first thing that module 6 talks about is vulnerable and underserved populations. It talks about the difference between those two populations as well as how it comes into play in the healthcare setting. So does anyone kind of want to give me their definition of vulnerable populations or underserved or both? Anyone at all? Go ahead.
Like have disabilities versus people who are underserved here, people who face more barriers, their race, gender, sexuality, etc.
Yeah. That's a great definition. I think that there can be a lot of overlap, which is where these terms get a little bit confused. But underserved is usually referring to specifically barriers to receiving healthcare services. And then vulnerable is kind of a little bit broader, encompasses a lot of other things that would make someone maybe less able to access healthcare services, but also affect them in a multitude of other ways. So it provides a list here, things like having a high risk for medical conditions, having fear and distrust in government programs for systemic reasons, not just out of nothing, limited ability to give informed consent, transportation issues, discrimination, things like that are what make a population vulnerable. And then underserved is receiving fewer healthcare services and having barriers to accessing them. And this is kind of a visual to kind of help you separate between the two. They're obviously going to be used interchangeably sometimes because they imply similar things. But yeah, it kind of gives an example here of how they're a little bit different, because someone with LEP, which is just saying limited English proficiency, they could be considered vulnerable, but they're not necessarily underserved because maybe the consumer does have access to high quality healthcare. So yeah, the language around these terms is important to know just so you can kind of differentiate those two populations in your head. But an important topic here is like, what might be some problems with this language? Terms like the word vulnerable, things like that. Can you guys think of any issues there might be with that? Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. I think we should be cautious with using the term vulnerable, especially just because not only is it a little bit stigmatizing, but it also can kind of generalize some very complex situations and kind of reduce them to things that are just a little bit overgeneralizing. Like a vulnerable population calling them vulnerable isn't really sufficient because it doesn't really recognize all of the reasons for that vulnerability and all of the systems contributing to it. And so we like to be a little bit careful with using terms like that because obviously how we refer to our patients is really important, and terms like vulnerable, like I said, they carry certain connotations that can be stigmatizing, and they also can simplify things that are actually really complex, and open the door to like much larger conversations. But yeah, do you guys have any questions about these terms? Okay, great. Another important topic kind of in the same realm is the social determinants of health. So there are a lot of these and all of them come to play in people's lives in different ways. But this slide gives some examples. So the social determinants being like economic stability, your actual physical environment, education, food, community and social context, and then the healthcare system itself. And the reason these are really important to consider is because you guys are going to come across patients in clinic that are affected by each of these different categories in very different ways. And being able to understand that and how it not only brings them to SHAC, but how it impacts their healthcare experience as a whole is really important, because our job is getting them in touch with health coverage, which means that we're trying to reduce these health barriers as much as we can. So it's important to know what's keeping them from getting health coverage, what's keeping them from getting the best quality healthcare that they can. So yeah, do you guys have any examples outside of what's listed here? Maybe anecdotally, any situations where you see the social determinants of health come into play? Anything at all? These topics are definitely more like discussion based. It's less like us throwing content at you, because I'm sure you guys have heard this term before, social determinants of health, but I think talking about it is important because it's going to be very, very prevalent when you go into clinic, because we are dealing with underserved populations. We're dealing with a very diverse patient population. So yeah, any comments? Yeah.
I like once met someone, I guess, that wasn't able to like go to their appointments and stuff because they didn't have access to transportation, and then also they were also living in an area that didn't have access to public transportation either. So I think that was like something that we have to work with them to like combat and figure out how they can like to the clinic to get like, access.
That is a really great point. I love that you brought up the transportation thing, because that's something that SHAC is actively working on right now. That is very much a thing. We are sometimes in clinic and I'll be calling to follow up with a patient to see if they're coming in, and they're saying either like, I can't afford gas money, I rely on the bus and the bus doesn't run as late as the clinic runs. These are very real issues that affect them, and it means that they cannot physically get to the place where they can receive healthcare. So that is a huge barrier that affects a lot of the patients at SHAC. Luckily, it is something that we're like actively working on right now and trying to find a solution for. So whenever you are eventually a full volunteer, you can definitely help with that, anyone that's interested. But yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Transportation is a huge one. Anything else that you guys have comments about? No? Okay, cool. All right. One quick discussion thing. Just with the people around you, I want you guys to talk about these two terms, humility and competency, and how you kind of think about them, how you would define them. Think about the ways that they're the same, how they're a little bit different. I know this is a super broad question, but it's broad on purpose because it's going to lead us into some of the definitions that the modules talk about. So if you guys just want to talk with the people around you about these terms.
Yeah. That, like I said.
Okay. I don't want to stop these conversations. Okay. Who would like to share what you guys discussed? It can be anything related to what is asked. Go ahead.
Other cultures, like understanding it versus your, like what your values are, what their values are, and kind of like how those relate to them, like how your values might influence other perceptions. So kind of like humility is more, I would say, like all encompassing and requires you to act on it. Competence is more kind of like understanding it.
I like that. Yeah, like more humility is kind of recognizing certain differences, and then competency is referring more to specific knowledge that you have about it. Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. What else did you guys say? Get at least one other group's input. Anything at all? Yes, go ahead.
We talked about how, humility is like not, putting someone down, like, for what they know, and like, also like, kind of like leveling yourself, like, it's like understanding that you're all on the same level as everyone, like, you're all human, and like, being humble in that aspect, because you might not know something, and like, that's okay, but like, be able to learn, be able to be wrong, and deal with it.
Yes, absolutely. That is on the money for the humility definition. And it's actually the perfect segue into this video that we're going to watch. This is just a really short video talking about the difference between cultural humility and competency. So yeah, let's go ahead and play this. Okay. So that's like, that end part is the main thing that I wanted you guys to focus on, was them explaining the distinction between these two things. After hearing that, can someone explain why it's more so the cultural humility that we're striving for over this idea of cultural competency, as if that's even attainable? Go ahead.
I guess when you enter with humility to like a place or setting, you kind of trust that the person, that you don't know everything and you're here to learn and gain the knowledge. There's this culture competency, it's important in some settings, but then you kind of get too caught up in knowing your own knowledge versus thinking.
Exactly. I think that's a great way of putting it, because it's not really that we're undermining that knowledge, like that cultural competency. It's more so just not overusing it and expecting it to kind of guide all of your interactions, make you all knowing in a healthcare setting. Because really, until you're talking with that patient, until you understand that patient's concerns from their perspective and not your own, you don't understand the situation. And that's where the humility part comes in, is recognizing that those differences exist, and that instead of relying on your own knowledge about them, that knowledge base will never be complete until you're actually interacting with someone experiencing these things. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay, cool. All right. Now, we're gonna get into the more in-clinic applications of all these concepts, where it comes into play. And I'm gonna pass it over to Yash and Grayson to talk about culture and language.
That out of the way. All right, so yeah. Uh, cultural language, like Verena had said, a lot of the patients that you're going to be interacting with might be very different from you, and might have a very different background than you, but that's everybody. And so it's very important that when you're going into a patient's room, that you are being completely open to what their struggles are, and that you're there to listen, and you're there to treat them as people, not as patients, not as diagnoses. Not even as insurance plans. And so it's really important that when you're going in, that you have empathy. And also something I wanted to touch on from the video that I really liked was the concept of lifelong learning. That was something that we had mentioned at the beginning. And I think that when I had mentioned it, I put too much emphasis on it in terms of insurance plans, but it's in terms of everything. It's that every time that you like step out the door in life, you're gonna run into something different that you haven't run into before. And it's the same thing in clinic, of that you're constantly learning, and so constantly try to be open to what you can learn from people that you're interacting with. There. And so on that note, we're going to transition here on the next couple slides into talking about interpreting, because that's something that's really important, something that you run into a lot. We rely very heavily upon interpreting. And so it's important. Verena, how many would you say there are? Maybe like 5 to 8 that are at a clinic? Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually been on the upper end more recently.
Good.
So like we're around like 8-ish interpreters. Most of them Spanish, but there's a few Mandarin, some other variation.
Yeah.
Depends on like who can volunteer that night, but there's always a Spanish person on staff, and there's always usually a Mandarin.
Yeah, and something that is really important that I know, at least when I first started, that I didn't think about. I'm very open to giving people my phone number, giving them a call afterwards, of saying like, hey, if this wasn't helpful, if you have any more questions, like you can call me. It's a very different story when you don't speak that language of the person that you're interacting with. And so it can create a lot of barriers. And so being able to have a good relationship with interpreting, and being able to interact with the interpreters of that day and saying, hey, I need to follow up with this patient at X date. Would I be able to like get your number to be able to do a conference call? Or is it possible that like you can put me in contact with your director or something like that? It's important to be able to have those relationships. And then also, sometimes you're not going to have an interpreter. And so I know, at least personally, like when I don't have an interpreter, I sometimes have, like at home, I have to use like Google Translate and stuff like that and just do the best that I can to be able to try to communicate with the patient, because you're not always going to have somebody right there at the ready to be able to help answer questions for you.
To that point though, if you like are taking the call and realize that you're not able to communicate with the patient to the best of your ability, don't like try and force it either. If you're like, say, communicating via text and you can do it with Google Translate, that's fine. But like if you're on a phone call and you know that you can benefit from an interpreter being present, then just end that call, send them a follow-up text or email or whatever. And then reschedule that conversation for a future time where you feel like you're able to get all of the information you can. But yeah, Grayson's right. In certain situations, if you just need to like know something specific, they're like, oh, I don't know that word like in English or something like that. Hit up Google, do what you can to communicate if that's like the only thing that's keeping you.
Yeah, it's about finding a balance of knowing where, like, about trying your hardest to be able to like come and meet them at a center point, but also not sacrificing the interaction you're having with this patient solely so that you can do it solo. If you run into a point where you're like, this is beyond my expertise, and this goes beyond just this, even in clinic, like don't say something to a patient that you're like 80% sure is true, 70% sure is true. Make sure that you talk to somebody, because the worst thing that we can do is like have somebody trust us and build that rapport with a patient, and then like it turns out that actually we were incorrect. And so make sure to always try to be cognizant of what your intellectual limits are, and that's perfectly fine. Everybody in clinic, not just directors or coordinators, are happy to help. That's sort of what our team is meant for in clinic. If you don't know something, you can ask someone.
And then, getting a little bit deeper into like working with interpretation, and this slide is not. This also, some of the stuff on the slide not just implies like working with interpretation, but also like working and speaking with patients. One of the really good things is that when you're speaking to a patient, it's always good to try to get on their face level. Like, I'm sure like you've encountered a situation where you're like seated and somebody's like standing over there, like towering over you, just like talking to you. Like that can definitely seem like cause like some type of anxiety, or it can cause like, it can make you feel uncomfortable, right? So that's like one really important thing. If you have the opportunity, try to like kneel down to like the patient's level or have a seat, like talk to them like face to face. So that definitely helps like have like a better conversation. Yeah.
Okay. Please try to limit the number of situations in clinic where you're like, hi, my name's Verena. Let me put like this is I hate this, okay? It feels like just weird.
Yeah.
Standing over them. They don't feel comfortable like talking to you that way. So what I would do in that situation, I would pull up a chair, I would go find a chair, I would sit eye level with the patient and talk to them. Okay. It makes everyone a lot more comfortable that way.
And if it's like a really quick conversation, like if you don't get a chair, you can always kneel down the best that you can. But that's like always gonna be much better than just like standing over them and doing that.
And the reason we emphasize this point is because it's very easy the way the clinic is set up to be in those situations where they're sitting down and you're not. And so we as a team just try to be very mindful of trying to like stay on high level.
Yeah, and it seems like really small and not that big of a deal, but there was a time that I was working with somebody who, like, I'm not gonna say who it was, they were a new volunteer, like literally this close to the patient. The patient's like sitting down, it was just like looking straight down.
Yeah.
And I kind of told him afterwards, it's like, don't do that. Like try to especially ask if you can have a seat, something like that. Like it just makes the conversation a whole lot better.
Nobody here will do that. So we're good. You got them trained. Nobody here will do that. So when you're like in the room with the patient, like, after you get covered, is like able to go in there, talk to the patient, like align yourself facing the patient, introduce yourself, and then the interpreter, if there's like another seat available, like they'll likely take that seat, or they'll also be like beside of you. Always speak directly to the client, like pause, like natural points, allow the interpreter to speak. So like, for example, if I was speaking to Grayson here and, Verena was like the interpreter, I wouldn't be talking to Verena, like can you say this, can you say that he doesn't qualify for Medicaid? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I want to say that to Grayson and like speak normally if I'm speaking to Grayson and then have Verena pick that up and pause and let her say that to him. Right? Does that make sense? So because if Grayson's a patient, I'm here talking to Verena, like how does that like make Grayson feel, right? It feels like he's just there in the room, like we're kind of talking behind his back or something. So making eye contact is also really important. Like again, this point, do not talk to the interpreter, like talk with the patient and the interpreter will like fill in. They're like the interpreters there are like trained. They go through like training, like as far as I know, like that we do to be a good interpreter. And so they know like how to pick up on the conversation and stuff. Avoid like please tell her or like instead say I would like, yeah, like try to avoid like that third person, like I was saying, like, don't try to like make commands or try to like just try to follow like good like speech, conversation, and etiquette when you're speaking with patients. Yeah. And then has anybody ever like seen the difference between like or the difference between interpreter and translator? Or, like anybody like has that come up before? But that is two different things, and that's one thing that like I didn't know when I like started. Somebody explain like that. They've heard of that before? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So when we're speaking with patients, we're going to rely on interpreters. So like also refrain from like saying like, can I get a translator? That's not technically like the correct term to use. It's to use an interpreter.
Also, if you like go up to a patient and talk with a patient, you discover that you don't speak the same language that they do, please do not just walk out of the room and get an interpreter. Try to do some
Yes,
sort
I was
of
gonna bring that up.
simple sign language,
Yeah.
something to say that you're coming back, because it's incredibly weird. You just walk into a room, say something to them, and they're just blank staring at you, and you just walk out.
Really good point.
I was gonna,
For me personally, at least with the Spanish speaking rooms, I'll at least like try. I feel like all of us at least can learn one sentence in Spanish, like.
They
maybe, like,
appreciate that
1
effort.
second, I'll go get an interpreter, like try and just know that or something, so that they can be aware that. And that you're gonna go get someone. A couple other practical points I wanted to mention. So it says pause at natural points. My rule of thumb is usually 2 to 3 sentences. Anything past that and it's getting to the point where the interpreter is probably gonna leave out something. So I would stop after around 2 to 3 sentences, allow them to interpret and then move on. What are the other things I was gonna say? Do you guys see what we're getting at with this diagram here too? About where you should be sitting. So the interpreter shouldn't be blocking your interaction with the client at all. So we have 3 of us, so we can do this.
Yeah.
So let's say Grayson were interpreting and I am the volunteer and I'm talking to Yash. This is a way that we could be standing because I can have still direct eye contact with Yash. Grayson is right there interpreting, but nothing is broken off. Does that make sense? Yeah. And these are really key things to understand because like, I don't know what percentage, maybe 75% of the people you're talking to are not going to be English speakers.
Yeah.
So knowing how to work with an interpreter is super key.
Yes, and I'd also say we're students, we're incredibly busy, but if you have the ability, being able to, like a lot of the people that you will interact with are Spanish speaking, for instance, to be able to actually learn some Spanish and actually like make an effort to try to communicate, because sometimes it can be hit or miss with interpreters. Sometimes interpreters are not always as fluent as they might come across, and so it's important to at least try to make an effort so that you're not using them as I was talking with a patient one time and the interpreter was really struggling, but she was a lot better than I was. But the person I was training with turned out to actually be fluent in Spanish. And she was able to like finish the conversation and help the interpreter out. And so being able to have that ability to at least like try, I would recommend.
Yeah. Grayson made a good point when you mentioned that not all of the interpreters you work with are going to be native speakers, we'll put it that way, but some are going to be more fluent than others, especially when it comes to like health insurance related terms.
Yes.
even the native speakers don't know a lot of it, so like sometimes they just have to look something up before they can fully get the idea across that you're saying. So keep that in mind when you're preparing, just like try to use like something that will be tracked in general, because yeah, the
Health
interpreter
insurance, like literally, I've had that trouble.
be the best.
Sorry, we're talking about terms that like come up a lot. I kid you not, health insurance. A lot of interpreters who are not native
Yeah.
speakers do not know the proper.
I think
term
the
for
the
health
other
insurance.
one that like I've experienced twice is like if you try to figure out like the household income, right? Like you want to ask that to the patient, with interpreter, like I've had two different occasions with interpreters like struggling for a second to figure out what the term is for household income or like income, like you know what I mean? So
There's a really simple solution to this. Does anybody have a really simple solution to these issues? Well, yeah, you can use Google Translate.
Explain like the definition of the term.
Yeah.
I was
give more
Yeah, I was gonna
details.
say, it's important that you're not just, I think it's the Feynman technique. It's not just that you're able to explain a concept to somebody who is privy to this information. Being able to also explain it to somebody who has no idea what a PTC is without using jargon. Because if you're interacting with the interpreter, a lot of the interpreters have worked with us a lot. And so they know what these terms are by now. They understand how our conversation is sort of roll, but not all of them do. And if you run into that issue, that's why it's important to be able to explain things in more layman's terms.
Most likely there probably isn't a direct translation for primary tax credit.
Yeah.
But there is a direct translation, for what it actually is. So yeah, that's a great point too.
Okay. So that was more like, so what we talked about on this slide was more of like what actually happens when you're in with the patient in the room, right? And actually having a conversation with them. But you'll also realize that you have to put in a little bit of like time and effort, like before you actually get in with the patient to make sure that you have like a smooth conversation with them. So that's what we're going to talk about here is that, you know, let's say, you know, this happens a lot of times that like now with the new text-based system, we'll get a text and saying, hey, like room 7, like GCC can now go see room 7 Spanish speaker, right? So you get that preface that, you know, they speak Spanish. All right. So like for me personally, like I don't speak Spanish, right? So I know that I'm going to need an interpreter. So what I would do is like going, like when I'm on my way to the room, there's like a little section, like a little pod or a little room where the interpreters are sitting. Like they have a director, they have like interpreters just sitting there. That's where I would go to that little room and say, hey, like, can I pair up with an interpreter? I need to speak for a Spanish speaking patient. At this point, you know, the interpreter, like one of the interpreters would come with me, we'd go to the room, like outside the room. And as we're talking, I'm briefing the interpreter, like what we're going to talk about, right? Like I'm going to say, you know, this patient has no health insurance, like no health coverage. They're here for an initial follow-up. They've never considered anything. This is their first appointment at Shack, right? So I'm trying to tell like the interpreter, like sort of like what the situation is. So they're also not sort of in the dark about like what we're going to talk about. And also like I'm gonna start telling them like what things that I'm starting to think about. It's like, hey, I may ask about this, and this, or I may like, you know, ask about like household income. I may ask about family side. These are all things that you want to be able to tell your interpreter. So like they're best prepared to help you when you're in the room. The next bullet point is also when you walk into the room, like this is regardless of if there's an interpreter or not, when you walk into the room, you want to introduce yourself and you want to introduce like your other volunteer. Like there's times where you'll go into a room and it's not just you by yourself. Most of the times it's you and another volunteer. Like it might be Grayson and I going talk to a patient. It's never like just me alone. Introduce yourself, like both of you to each other. You'll have name tags on. Well, we make like name tags for everyone, but also introduce yourself to the patient. You know, like let's introduce yourself. Also let the interpreter also introduce themselves so that they're also part of that care team. So let them do that. We talked about every sentence you say should be directly interpreted by the interpreter. Like Verena was saying, like try to have like 2 or 3 sentences. Like depending on sort of how like complex the sentences are, try to have 2 to 3 sentences and then like take a pause so the interpreter can interpret that. This same thing happens for a phone conversation. And then if you have any issues, see your coordinator. Usually there's never like issues, but if they arise, please tell us.
Definitely. And then, for the third point, like, you guys will get better at that with time. Like, it's kind of hard when you start out working with an interpreter, realizing when is it actually a good place to stop. But it's something that you'll get better at with practice, because you'll realize when you can kind of tell some information was missing versus when you could have like gone a little longer, maybe. Like, that's something that will be practiced. And then for the fourth point, emphasis there, because like that entire, all those bullet points should happen before a phone conversation in the same way that you would do it in clinic. Like, just
Yes.
like you debrief before you walk into the room with the interpreter, you should have a debrief conversation with the interpreter before you talk on the call. Even if it's as simple as a, hey, I'm about to call X patient, we're gonna be talking about this, this, and this, I just need your help with this, translating this idea, interpreting, sorry. So yeah, debrief always before, so that they can actually go in, you know, having some sort of idea about what they're gonna be talking about.
Yeah, and 2 points before equal 3 points. Yes, try to always talk to the patient, but also the interpreter isn't lava. Like, they are a person as well, and they are part of the conversation, and so sometimes they'll like ask for like clarification on something, and that's okay. Just try to make sure that it's not a conversation that you're solely having with the interpreter, because then it, like, the patient feels like they didn't get invited to the party. And it makes it very difficult, because then it feels palpable that there's some sort of power dynamic that's at play.
Like, if Grayson's interpreting and I'm the volunteer, it should never be, hey, can you ask the patient what their household income is? No, I'm looking at the patient, I'm saying, hi, what's your household income? And then Grayson says, in whatever language, hi, what's your household income? Okay? Does that make sense?
Oh gosh, I'm losing my point. The second point that I was gonna make is that sometimes you will have interpreters where you will say the 2 to 3 sentences and it takes you a little bit to get it out. And then the interpreter will like say it back to the patient, and it takes about half the time. And that has happened to me several times where I've been having a conversation. I don't feel like the interpreter is getting everything across. It's okay to either say something to the interpreter, because they could, like, they might think, oh, this is just like fluff, like this doesn't need to be said, but you're able to say, no, like this is actually important to get across. But another important point, when you're not able to speak the same language as the patient, doing follow-ups during the conversation of, does that make sense? Do you have any questions? To be able to like actually give them room to talk. Because oftentimes some of the patients will be a little bit apprehensive to like speaking with the interpreter, and they're more in a listening position because they're at the doctor. But this is truly meant to be a conversation. So make sure that you're checking in with your patient and making sure that they are following along with everything you're saying. And then the last point, and then we can move on from this. I've been saying a lot of bad things about interpreters. The interpreters we have are great, and interpreters are people. And so, well, no, I feel bad. The interpreters are great. They really are. You will run into some instances where things could be done better, but they really are awesome. And so make sure that you try to have some leniency with them and give them some space to do what they do, just like you would yourself or anybody else.
The interpreters are volunteers, just like that, so they're just doing their best. So, you know, you work as a team to make sure that the ideas come across.
There's a great chance every time that you come into clinic, especially at med clinic, that you will utilize one of the interpreters.
Yeah.
Like for that, there's a great chance. Yeah. Yeah. So any questions? And when you actually like do come to clinic, like the first day, you'll obviously get like a tour. Grayson and I are working on putting together like resources for y'all, like about like how images of the clinic looks like, what's the flow like, so where the interpreters are actually sitting, things like that. You'll get like images of that, but obviously like when you come the first day, like you're not expected to know like where all of this is. Like you're not expected to know where the interpreters are and like go get them, like, you know what I mean? So
it's okay to ask, not just
yes,
within GCC, asking.
You can ask anybody there, like
if somebody says like, hey, can you like For instance, yeah, if you can go get an interpreter, or if you can go get.
Yeah.
Eston, or if you can go talk to pharmacy, like, it's okay to say, I don't know. That.
Yeah.
Like, you're.
Also, because it'd be a valid question, because they change locations a lot, so you can.
That's true.
The med directors, hey, where is social needs, where's, whoever,
Yeah.
they'll point you in the right direction.
And clinic is busy, and clinic is also a lot of hallways. It's like, it's not a whole lot of like open space, it's a lot of hallways, and so, yeah, you can kind of get lost sometimes.
Oh.
Especially when at med clinic after hours, some of the doors lock, like automatically behind you, and I've gotten locked in a room before. It happened. Yeah.
That's never happened to me, but-
Yeah, the chances of it happening to you are low.
So he
That's
didn't-
why I say ask for directions, because I did not ask for directions and I got stuck in like the back door and.
So he didn't come to training session. That's what
Yeah,
happens.
That's what happened.
See, he didn't come to the training session. That's why.
All right, patients with disabilities, module A. When somebody's disability can be a very nebulous term. A majority of the time in a clinical setting, when you're talking about a disability, it's referring to a social security recognized disability. Anybody who has experience with social security, with actually like looking at this, which I doubt any of y'all have, I did before I actually started making these presentations. Disabilities recognized by Social Security are incredibly categorized. There are, I think, it's like a decision tree of that. First, you have to fit within 12 categories of disease involvement. So musculoskeletal, humoral, endocrine. And then it's broken down even from there. And so it can be very full. I'm not gonna say I don't know about y'all. I've worked with patients in getting them Social Security disability approval. That way they were then able to apply for Medicaid. But with Medicaid expansion, disability, it's still important to understand the concepts. It's important to understand what it is, but it's no longer gonna be a criteria within North Carolina as far as being able to get patients Medicaid.
Does everyone understand why with Medicaid expansion, why that's not required? If you don't, please feel free to ask, it's totally okay.
I will also say that as far as this, two things about disability is, one, a disability for a condition for one person, like two people can have the same condition. But for one person, it is a disability, for another person, it isn't, because definition of disability is something that impairs one or more of their major daily activities. And so for some people, especially when it comes to like a mental impairment, two people can have anxiety is a recognized social security disability. But two people can have anxiety, but in very different degrees and in very different ways. And so every patient that you run into, it's not as simple as, oh yeah, they have PTSD. It's not that simple. You can have 10 patients in a night that have PTSD. It manifests completely different. It derives from completely different sources. And so it's important that when you are talking with them, it is different each and every single time.
Yes. I also think this is a really good place to point out that as you guys are talking about health coverage related things, a lot of other sort of social needs are going to come up in that conversation. Things like maybe having a disability but never having tried applying for it before. Stuff like that is going to come up. And so that's when knowing where to connect them with comes in handy, because you guys aren't expected to be able to walk them through the process for applying for disability. That's something where you should be like, oh, you're interested in applying for disability. You don't really need this for Medicaid, but you could benefit from gaining disability income or something like this. Let me connect you with the Department of Social Services and give them that contact information so that they know what to do next. Although that seems like outside of the scope of your role, it's really not, because like I said, these things are going to come up in the conversations about health coverage in general. And so kind of having some idea of what to connect them with and when is really important. And the disability point comes up pretty often.
Yeah, I'd say that applies also out. It is within the scope of your role, because you should be going into clinic each and every single Wednesday, Tuesday, Monday. You should be going in every single time to clinic, and every single time you go to a patient room, you're there to have fun. It's not just like we do insurance, we do health coverage, that's what our roles are. But our roles are also people, and if a lot of patients won't ask for something if they don't know that that resource is available. And so it's important for you to ask these questions, and being able to put them in contact with the right people. And you might not always know who the right people to contact are. That's why, again, you have everybody here that's able to help you and be able to work through that.
Because the way we learned about these resources wasn't through like a training or anything. We learned them because it came up one time and we looked up what resources to connect them with. And then we added that to our kind of body of knowledge as a team about what to connect people with. And like same thing with actual like, concerns. If in the middle of an encounter, someone, you're helping them find coverage and they're like, I actually have a lot of dental concerns, but then none of the options work for them. Then that's a good time to be like, hey, have you heard about Shack Dental Clinic? It's one of the 3 health clinics that Shack offers. Let me submit a referral for you. These are things we'll teach you how to do, but it's important for you guys to know that that's also like one of your responsibilities, is like referrals, things like that.
That's good.
Sorry, there you go.
No, I was gonna say like wrap it up, but like it's a really good point that Verena and Grayson both made, is that like every Wednesday or like Tuesday, like when we have like those clinics, like Wednesday when you go into clinic, you're not gonna have like 3 patient interactions, 2 of them like marketplace, 1 Medicaid application. Like there's some days where like just showing a patient on your personal computer, like they didn't know, like they come to Shack Medical Clinic, they didn't know about Shack Dental Clinic, like just showing them that website and showing them, hey, you can make an appointment or make an appointment for them, is like you've helped them, right? It's not just like helping them is not just like starting an application for them or finding them like health insurance, health coverage. I think that's a really good point to know, is that like you can help in like so many other ways. Even like showing them just a resource is a great way to help. So
Yeah, I had a patient who, this was actually a couple weeks ago, I had a patient who I was talking to and seeing like what needs they had, like whether or not they had any dental coverage, whether or not they previously had health insurance, and if there were any medications that they were taking. And it turns out that when I was talking with them, that I found out the patient had asthma, and that they had been receiving a inhaler from the IMC, the Interfaith Council. Med team did not know that. Med team did not know that that patient had asthma. And so I, like, from asking that, I said, do you have a reliable inhaler? Do you have access to that? And I was able to bring that up to med team, and they did not previously know that information. Now that is few and far between, because everybody is working diligently to do their job. But a little bit of redundancy doesn't always hurt.
okay, I think that's gonna wrap up like module like 8. Anybody have any questions about that? I know that was super short for that module. Okay, I think with the little bit of time that we have left, we're just gonna do one activity together. We're gonna like practice out an interpreting interaction. This is something that like most likely you will have to do, so it's like really good to like be familiar with this. So is it a group of 3?
Yeah.
Have
Try this out, so like,
Move chairs around.
yeah, if you just move those around, try standing up. And then you guys are probably asking yourselves, what language should I be trying with it? You don't need to try it in a specific language. You guys can be doing even this English to English. But just practice assigned roles, practice the way that you're supposed to be standing with the interpreter, and then have someone waiting the 2 sentences, allowing them to repeat. Practice that whole scenario.
Yeah. we have 18 people, so 6 groups.
Yeah. And you guys need to stand up and go anywhere you can.
And stand up, move around, walk around.
Is there another one after this?
Just as well.
I think we'll let them go at like 7:05-ish.
Yeah.
Bring them back in and then wrap it up.
Just give them enough time to realize how important it is to have a third person in the conversation. That's all. Yeah. No, it's incredibly hard, and that's why I think it's important for you to in effort to try to understand, especially science, it's just something that comes up a lot. And I always think, I think it's incredible. But it can sometimes be that they have to always do that. No, and I also want to make sure to backpedal, I want.
No, I think you said it, because I told you.
I want them to be aware that you're going to run into those or not bad interpreters, you're gonna run into something, so. So, let's be.
So,
Thank you. It's a lot better. Simply. I have no idea. They,
I feel like we can talk through about it, but it's.
we can find out. Worst case scenario, I'd be happy to, and I think y'all would still be able to just under the whole like on. Not really. If the volume is, I think the volume will be because. I would hope this picks up.
yeah. We should double check.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're gonna be talking about, other departments. Yeah. I also think we're not practice. Getting people used to the elevator. This.
Let's do that. Can you take note of that?
Yeah, that's actually good.
Because that's really negative. We can almost standardize, it, like obviously that is one, but people appreciate, I noticed in the military, some sort of guideline what you're trying to say on their.
And they can have their own. Yeah. Like.
Yeah. All right, guys, is this even working? Oh, all right, let's bring it together. So, can anyone share like what you learned from that experience? Is it more awkward than you may have expected? Is it like, what's good? What's better than you thought? Can anyone share comments? Yes. Yes. Great point. Something that Yash said, and I think is really good, is that once the patient gets comfortable with the interpreter, their eyes are going to be on the interpreter, not on you. This is like happens with like every patient. They're going to be talking to the interpreter because they're the ones speaking their language. That does not mean that you break eye contact with them and start talking to the interpreter. You're still talking directly to the patient, regardless of who they're talking to, if that makes sense. Okay. So yeah, it is really hard. And like I said, it's something that comes with practice. But great point. Any other comments? Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah, no, it is really hard. And that's why the clarification, you should feel like very you should never like hold back from asking for clarification or allowing the interpreter to clarify something. Again, these encounters should never be rushed, like take your time getting these points across to the patient and stuff. So great point. And then what were you gonna say? You're good. Yes. Great point. I know with me at least, because like I feel like I talk kind of quickly, and it's kind of like once you become used to that, it's hard to stop yourself in your tracks. And then also like you have to continue that thought later, which is also hard to remember like where you were going, you know what I mean? So it's difficult, but yeah, again, practice makes perfect with this. That's why we wanted you guys to kind of do this demo so that you can realize what might end up being difficult in clinic and how you can kind of prepare for that. So yes. Okay. 7:15. It's a few minutes. We'll get out of here so soon. Yes. Will do. Thank you. We're getting kicked out. I think that's next week. Yeah. Okay, I guess we need to wrap up then. So yeah, Great points, guys. Any like final quick questions about interpreting any of the topics related to what we discussed today, module 6, 7, and 8? No? Okay, really quickly, wrap up. If you have questions, you can email us, finish any modules that you haven't completed, the HIPAA training. It's next week, right? Yeah, next week's training, extremely important. Okay, we're gonna be talking about like actual in-clinic stuff that you're gonna like need to know for every single clinic. So make sure you're here next time. And yeah, that's all. Thank you guys so much for being here. Great job as always. You have made it so far into training.
If you have about attendance,
You can also answer questions.
Okay.
not in. Thank you. It's over.